All right, AP. So this is the next part of the Reformation. This is actually the next chapter. It's about the religious wars that we were talking about. So the notes I gave you in class the day you wrote the essay should be about the religious wars between 1559 to 1648. This is important because these religious wars can actually show up in the form of a DBQ on the essay or on the test. And this is also that hinge moment. It's like you started a Reformation. Now, where are we going with it, right? You had the Protestants came out with Luther, John Calvin, and the Anabaptists, and then we had the Anglicans, that switch over in England. But in the Catholic Church's response, and now what comes after? Where are we going because of this? And one of the results is a conflict, religious wars that take place. So we talked about that one of the Counter-Reformation, the Catholic Church didn't really do much in fixing it. They supported the idea that church authority and the Pope was the head of the church, but they really didn't fix any of the doctrinal issues that Luther had came up with, that the idea of faith alone and Bible's authority and the fact that the church is actually the people, not the religious structure, which those things are to change politics and social structures and the roles of women. But the Catholic Church, no, they're not doing that. So there's still a conflict there between church and state in the Catholic Church. And the only thing we are going to see, like we said, the Jesuits are going to come out of this, that we're going to see some reforms, the end of those absentee bishops, and you're going to see some reforms. You're going to see the re-strengthening of what they call canon law, the laws inside the Catholic Church. But for the most part, doctrine's still the same, all right? Doctrine doesn't change. You are also going to see Baroque art, and that's this. This is the difference between, this is what we're talking about, that idea of the huge presence of God that comes from Baroque art versus the Puritan church where it's just functionality, okay? So the Reformation does some real social changes that come in with women, with education, with politics in England. And you're going to see a lot of backlash later with these things. But for the Catholic Church, they're going to kind of hold on to their doctrine and hold on where they're at. We are going to see Baroque art, but that's kind of where we're at. But the real thing is there's a political ramification from all this. So there's a religious and a social, but now there's going to be a political ramification, is that monarchs that we talked about before that came out of the Renaissance and Machiavellian humanistic ideas, that these people are going to strengthen their power, but not through the old ways of doing it. They see there's a new way to gain power. That's what we saw with Henry VIII, which changing the religion so that he can gain power. And he manipulates this new merchant class that's forming in Parliament. And the urban populations, that he uses it as a power. And that was that Pilgrimage of Grace DBQ we looked at that showed that the northern, more religious, more conservative areas are pushing back against Henry and his urban populations. And they're using those Machiavellian concepts, all right? And so they also are going to have more financial control and more structure, and they're going to create a bureaucracy that gives them the ability to control that power. You saw that with the Tudors with the Star Chamber. And we're going to see that with Louis the 11th and the Spider King, where he can create this bureaucracy that pulls power away from the nobility and increases his power. So it's an urban-based monarch. They also have beginnings of modern armies, that they have new technology and armies they're paying for that are conscripted. So we don't need the knights anymore. We don't need nobles anymore. They take away their political power, their economic power, and now their military their military power. And so there's an increase in the power of the kings, and that's these new structures. And it's very Machiavellian, all right? They're going to break those old feudalistic common law ideas that the nobles were the ones that enforced the laws and gave govern. And we're going to see the beginning of courts and the beginning of political power. And that's that idea that the prince now is kind of released, and he's a force of nature, and that laws are crafted to give the king the power. Because before this, it was the church versus the king. Now we're going to see a movement towards the power of the king becoming to a point where it's the king versus the people that we're going to see forming. One of these examples of these new political leaders is the idea of a politique. Elizabeth is one. You really don't know what religion she is. She makes the New Common Prayer book. It seems very much one direction, seeming very, very Catholic. And then on the other side, there's something that's very, very Protestant. And she uses religion then as a way to manipulate and to maintain order. She's not picking one side or the other, and both sides think she's on their side. So therefore, she can gain power by doing this. And we're going to see kind of the structure here that France, they're going to consolidate power, stability under the Tudors. These are the ones pushing out the nobles and creating stability under one strong family name, the Tudors in England. In France, the Valois are eliminating the nobility to a degree and the nobility's power and placating them and creating structure inside the bureaucracy, inside the government controlled by the king. And of course, in Spain, we've already talked about where Ferdinand and Isabella are going to push out the non-Muslims or non-Catholics and push out the Muslims and the Jews, and they're going to unify their two kingdoms into one large kingdom. And of course, the Holy Roman Empire, well, it's a hot mess. It's a box of cats because there you've got all these different states. Now you've got a political divide and a religious divide with the Peace of Augsburg. So, yeah, that's not good. Okay, so where do these religious wars show up first? Okay, obviously we had to dust up when Martin Luther and his whole thing there between the Roman Catholics and Luther's Protestant forces. Here we have another example. All right, France, these are the provinces. France is kind of a multi-regional thing, right? And some of these areas you're seeing the beginning of a Protestant grain in the form of what we call the Huguenots, okay? So the French Calvinists, these Huguenots, it's very popular among the nobility. These are Calvinists, okay? The Huguenots are Puritan Calvinists, all right? It's very popular amongst the nobility and this very intelligentsia class. The nobles, like it says, somewhere around half to 40% are these. And they're, again, these wealthy urban populations. But at the same time, France, because of these provinces and the power divide, also has a very strong Catholic population. So you have these almost little countries inside of a country thing that's dividing the nation. So the Huguenots, all right, these Protestants, you're going to see actions to kind of control them. You're going to see what we call the Edict of Fontainebleau in 1540. The Catholic Church, through the king, is going to use the Inquisition to try to rein in these Huguenots. Okay, and then you're going to see the Edict of Chateaubriand is going to establish measures against the Protestants. So there's a pushback, right? But you're also seeing very wealthy families like the Bourbons. They're going to have power, and they're going to use that power to tamp down these actions against the Huguenots. All right, and so the family is the Valois, and they're going to see the major conflict is the Habsburg Valois War. That's the Habsburgs were the ones who controlled Spain and the Holy Roman Empire, and the Valois control the French Empire. The war ends with the Treaty of Château-Cambrai that ends the Habsburg Wars and basically separates these family states and kind of creating this kind of, in the end, it helps create that Peace of Augsburg moment, and the idea that you're going to get Germany is divided, but because the wars and the conflicts, they accidentally spread this Protestant religion to other areas, and so here we go. Henry II, he's the last of the very powerful Valois. He was the eagle, that's what they called him. He was strong. and vigorous, and he liked the joust, and he liked war, and he was a powerful king. And he has 3 sons who aren't that. All right. He has a son named Francis. Now, if you've seen the show Reign, Francis II is the one who's married to Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, the vision of him in that show is the complete opposite of what he is historically. Francis and Mary grew up basically like siblings, even though they're betrothed to each other. He is very sickly boy who later is going to die from his illnesses. Charles is a very religious man, but he's very wishy-washy. He can't really make a decision on his own and is very easily manipulated. And Henry III, Henry III is openly gay, and and so that has a problem, obviously, in 16th century. He also has young men who wear women's clothing around. Now, today, that's a different story. But in that time period, it doesn't go over well. But Henry also is extremely weak, that he's not a military force, and that he's seen as the Catholics even go against Henry. So, but how this all gets kind of moving is that Henry, have you ever heard of a man named Nostradamus? Because their mother is a woman named Catherine de' Medici. That's right. Same family, Italian bankers. All right. So Catherine is clearly a Machiavellian, and her soothsayer is a man named Nostradamus. And Nostradamus predicts the death of Henry II, who ends up dying jousting. And he's jousting, and for some reason, either a visor malfunctions or something happens, and a large stick gets shoved in his eye. Right? Part of the lance breaks, and part of it ends up in his eye, and he ends up dying because of it. And that's what led to these Henry's children coming to power. And so they're all mama's boys, and she thinks she can control this. This is Catherine de' Medici. All right, this is Francis. Let's go back. This is Francis. That's Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots. He dies. She ends up getting shipped back, and that's going to cause the whole Elizabeth execution of Mary and everything. Okay. The Treaty of Chantilly-Cumbres ended the war with Spain, right? We got these War of the Three Henrys coming in, and so Henry dies. Francis comes in. Francis dies. His brother comes in. Catherine decides that the empire is weak, that she needs to bring in power, and she needs money. So she decides she's going to marry her son off to a Bourbon, who is a Huguenot named Henry Navarre. So to bring power in, to isolate these super Catholics, the ultra Catholics under Guise, Henry Guise, we're going to bring in this Bourbon. And so they're going to marry Henry to Charles's sister. Now, Henry and Charles's sister, Marguerite, hate each other and are in no way going to even give each other the time of day. They consummate the marriage and never talk to each other again, which is perfectly fine with Henry. Well, the problem is once they go to Paris, and there's all these Protestants show up. Well, fearing that they may make a move against Catherine, she goes to her son and says, look, they're plotting against you. They're not here to celebrate this marriage. They're out to take your empire. Well, then he goes to Guise and tells them, hey, you need to do something about this. And Guise then goes out, and instead of killing the leaders of the Bourbons, he kills all of the Bourbons he can. He kills everyone. He kills somewhere between 5,000 to 30,000 Protestants in Paris. This becomes what they call the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. And there's an old saying, it's not paranoia when someone actually is trying to kill you. And so the response then is it triggers a civil war. The Bourbon Huguenots, these Huguenots, right, then rally all the other Huguenots, which then cause France to be ripped apart in a civil war. And this is why this is the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. They're going to murder thousands of Protestants, and triggered a civil war. There's another image from it. Well, Guise then, basically the whole thing happened. Charles then blames his mother. He shaves his head and becomes a monk because he abdicates because of the bloodshed. Henry the Third comes in, who is not popular in the least here. And so this war breaks out. Well, in the end, Henry assassinates the other Henry, the ultra-Catholic one, Guise, gets assassinated by followers of Henry III, and Henry III gets assassinated by the ultra-Catholics, which leaves only one Henry standing. Two Henrys dead, one still remains, and that one is a Bourbon. But the problem is he's a Protestant in a predominantly Catholic country. So what does he do? He converts. He becomes a Catholic. And he says, Paris is worth a mass. Why? Henry the Fourth, now of France, Henry Navarre, the first Bourbon king, says, look, religion is not as important as politics. That if I can have France by being Catholic, it's worth taking a wafer and drinking wine. And so that's a politique. He doesn't care about religion. He's using religion as a way to maintain order and to advance his political views. So that's why this is important. So it starts out with a strong Valois, but in trying to control, first to eliminate them, the Huguenots, and then by marrying them to manipulate them, backfires, triggers a civil war, and in the end, the people you're trying to eliminate, they end up winning. So not a good plan. And the Valois are all wiped out. And the new power comes in called the Bourbons. But why this is important is that after he converts, and this is that politique moment, right, that he passes this thing called the Edict of Nantes. You're like, okay, well, he's no longer a Protestant. Now he's a Catholic. Well, sort of. He gives the Protestants rights so they could have their own cities. They could have their own governments, and they could also have their own walls and weapons. So they couldn't practice their religion in public, but they can worship it privately. That's a great thing. It brings peace to France, right? It strengthens his political power because he gave in to the Catholics by being Catholic, but he also gave in the Huguenots by giving them their own cities. The problem, though, is now you've created country inside of a country. Most of the country is Catholic, but part of the country is Protestant. And so there's a country inside of a country, which keeps it's Germany. It's the Holy Roman Empire all over again. So what started out to eliminate Protestants actually turned into something that brought Protestants to power with a politique. But in the end, it divides the country economically and politically. But it did maintain the peace. So, yeah. However, it did cause a problem back in England with that whole Mary Queen of Scots and beheading thing that's going to happen. All right. But the problem in France, though, is that by giving them these things, it's going to create a new absolute monarch. And they're going to use the estates. In France, the government is divided up. This country is divided up into the clergy, the three estates, clergy, nobility, and bourgeois, right? The third estate, which is the peasants, the commons, okay? But the problem is the clergy and the nobility own all the land and make all the rules, and the commons get no say. And this only gets worse with Henry Navarre, because what Henry's going to do is he basically, yes, he strengthened the social hierarchy. He strengthens government institutions and parliaments, which are these local noble-ran governments, not like you think parliaments were voting people. These are groups of nobles coming together, right? And he encouraged colonization in the New World, in France and places like that. And he does establish the Bourbon dynasty. But the problem is he creates this thing called the nobility of the robe and the sword. He lets nobles buy a position. Sword are people who earned it. Okay? People with the sword earned their position. The people that are the nobles of the robe bought their position. So in England, by the time we get to the 1700s, there's only about 200 noble families. You're talking about maybe a few thousand nobles left in a country of almost 1 million people. But you go to France, there's 40,000 nobles because they bought their position. And they don't pay any taxes. They own land. And they also get a stipend from the government by being a noble. You're seeing the beginning of the French Revolution is what they're creating. Okay, so like England creates a civil war because Henry uses Parliament. This Henry ends up creating the French Revolution by creating this nobles of the robe and the sword, and creates an unfair system. So, yeah, oops, all right. And which that's going to lead to others who are going to strengthen it by weakening the nobility and bringing more power to government in the form of Cardinal Richelieu, whose whole purpose is to create this idea of a strong French government that's run by the noble, by the king. And he's going to use a thing called the 30 Years' War, we're going to talk about in a minute, that he's going to use it to gain more power for France. So Richelieu is going to eliminate other forces. He's going to eliminate the nobility by moving more of the power into the government, okay, with these intendant systems of weakening the nobility. He can increase taxes. He creates a standing army by doing this. He's going to push the idea eventually of mercantilism. And he's going to weaken other countries, like in the wars with Spain. And, of course, the 30 Years' War weakens his enemies. So, and we're seeing the beginning of absolutism. And that's what's going to trigger, because of the Bourbons and because of Richelieu, you're going to see this beginning of a major power play that's going to cause the French Revolution. Now, by the way, why Richelieu ends up, he's not a king, he's a cardinal. He's actually the advisor to Henry Navarre, Henry Bourbon's son, who is Louis the 13th, who is right before Louis the 14th, who is like the Sun King in major absolutism. Okay. So, and this is the Habsburg dynasties. This is Spain. Okay. Spain is going to be like a religious kingdom. It's going to try to bring back Catholicism all over Europe and undo the Reformation. And one place you're going to do this, and you're going to have a reading called the Battle of Lepanto, that Spain is going to, at this point, end up pushing the Ottoman Empire, which is the Turkish Empire, out of the Mediterranean with the Battle of Lepanto. And we'll talk more about that one later. All right. But the real power under Spain comes from Philip II. Philip, you're going to see an insurgence of new ideas like potatoes and spread, he's going to be trying to bring back religious power. He's going to defeat the Turks in Lepanto and control the Mediterranean. He's also going to try to increase the tax base on places like the Netherlands against the Dutch. He's going to build a palace called the Escurial, which is very religious. Here's the thing, though, and this is the Escurial. You're going to notice something right away. There are a whole lot of like religious places in this one. And we'll talk more about him with absolutism. Okay? And this is where the Escurial is. The thing is, though, is that he wants to strengthen religion and bring back the Catholicism. And so one of the places you're going to see a large increase of Puritanism is in the Netherlands with the Dutch. And he tries to rein them in. And then by accidentally insulting the Dutch, he triggers a civil war with the Dutch. And now he's got a war with the Dutch. He's fighting the Ottoman empires. I think we've seen this before. All right. And that's the Dutch revolt. William of Orange, all of their leaders are named Orange. They're all from the same house. We'll talk more about the Dutch later. That they tried to basically force the Protestants under the boot that they control this area, that try to push the Dutch under the Spanish boot. Well, the problem is Elizabeth I is using this as a way to provoke Philip. So she's supplying weapons and troops to help the Dutch fight this civil war against the Spaniards. And in the end, this is one of the things that's going to trigger the Spanish Armada and cripple Spain. So there you go. In the end, the Dutch actually, the northern part, the part up here, ends up becoming independent. So it starts out as an insult by Philip's sister, who is the ward of this area, the ruler of this area. She insults the Dutch merchants. Then when the Dutch respond, it turns into a civil war. They pour in mercenaries into this area. It ends up turning into England uses this as a proxy war against Spain, which then increases England's power while at the same time crippling Spain, because they're going to lose this very wealthy, rich area of trade that was helping Spain. And we know from what we've talked about that Spain can't really lose any trade areas because they already pushed out all their merchants in the form of the Reconquista, where Jews and Muslims were pushed out. Okay. So, so this idea, though, that the revolt in the Netherlands. So we said Philip II, Spain. We can see the use of the Inquisition. Margaret, the regent Margaret is violently puts down by Philip. There's this rebellion of the beggars that these Dutch are trying to push back for reforms, and they're addressing the regent, which is Margaret, his sister, and then Philip, feeling that these people don't know where their place is, sends in Duke Alba, who executes thousands of these people, and that triggers the Civil War. And in the end, okay, and so the Spanish send in these mercenaries in 1576, which then ends up, the Spain is basically humiliating, edict that removes Spanish troops from the Netherlands. So in the end, because of England's support, the Dutch push out the Spanish in northern part and then become a free state. So, and here's the reason why this is important, okay, is that the reason why this is important is that in the end, the reason why Spain fails is not because they don't have wealth and don't have power. In France, you see the beginning of the setting up of the French Revolution. You're creating a strong centralized government under the Bourbons. And eventually the Bourbons are going to turn on their own religion group, the Huguenots, and they're going to end up under Louis XIV, push the Huguenots out and thoroughly unify France. But in the process, they set the stage. That strong, powerful monarch sets the stage for what's coming, which is the French Revolution. With the Dutch, the insulting of the Dutch merchants, of making them basically kowtow to the Catholic ruler and to kind of reining in their religion and using the Inquisition on them, provokes a conflict because the Spanish can't not accept the demise of the Catholic Church in these areas. That Philip is on a religious move, where France is on a political move because the politique. This is a religious move, that he's on a war path against Ottoman Turks who are Muslims, and he's against the Protestants in the Netherlands. And then in the end, in 1585, he's going to send his entire armada, provoked by the death of Mary, Queen of Scots. He's going to now find there's no way to take England. And so he sends his armada to wipe out this Protestant blight of this woman on the throne. And in the end, the defeats there and the defeats against England when the Spanish Armada is destroyed is what cripples them. This religious zealot war that he's fighting to return the Catholic Church is what destroys his empire in the end. And yeah, he won the Mediterranean, but nobody cares anymore. The trade routes are out in the Atlantic, not in the Mediterranean. You basically put all your money in Blockbuster. And everybody went to Netflix. So that's the problem. All right. And that's what we talked about. Her help for the Dutch, for Elizabeth's help for the Dutch, and her non-religious committal is what provokes him into invading. She's playing him. She doesn't care about the religious part. She wants the power. Her pirates are raiding his ships. The sea dogs are raiding his ships and stealing Philip's money. And then at sea. And then on land, that provoking of the Dutch that's going to make them a liberated state in the northern part, she's supplying the weapons to them. And then the final straw is that she won't accept his marriage proposals after he was married to her sister. And in the end, when he has a way, which is Mary, Queen of Scots, gets framed as part of the plot to kill her, she has Mary, Queen of Scots executed. So there's no way he can come to the throne. There's no way there now. And so she sends the fleet, or he sends the fleet to destroy her. And then a huge wind comes from nowhere and a storm and blows half his fleet into the rocks in the northern part or around Scotland, and he gets destroyed. Part of it does. The other part ends up in the shallow parts of the Thames, and their big boats can't fight against the fast pirates of the Sea Dogs under Sir Francis Drake, and she wipes him out. And Spain can't continue. And it's all because he's on this religious zealot kind of move to bring back the Catholic Church against this woman who's playing him every chance she gets. So, and then eventually Spain becomes what we call a sick old man. That inbreeding inside the family eventually ends with Charles II, who is extremely, he comes to power. He's weak in mind and body. He basically can't have any children. And so that led to the Habsburgs dying out in Spain, and the Bourbons actually take over, which we'll talk about this later. And so they went from being literally the most powerful economic country in Europe to being rejected. So there you go. Okay. The last one is why you got your bag of food. Okay. The last one is the Holy Roman Empire is the 30 Years' War. And I'm sorry this one's a little bit longer, but this is why you got your treat bag. Okay. Is that the 30 Years' War is just that. It's 30 years. It's a genius move. But this is all these other wars, like the war with the Dutch, the Civil War in the Dutch in the northern part, that's still a religious war. The Civil War in France, with the War of the Three Henries, is still a religious war, even though someone comes to power that isn't really religious. Okay? This one starts out as a religious war and ends as a political war. Okay? So here's why. So you got your bag. Here's what happened. The 30 Years' War starts in Prague. So if you look at your bag that you got, if you've already eaten it, you had a sausage. You had some type of beef stick. Okay? Because when you eat it, you should remember that this Prague is in Czechoslovakia, which is technically part of Bohemia. It actually, not technically, it is part of Bohemia, which is German. Even though it's in the Czech Republic, it is Bohemian German. Okay. So what happened? So you eat your sausage, remember it. That's the sausage. Okay. So what happened is they got a new leader. Okay. The new Holy Roman Emperor comes in. He wants to consolidate power. And he then tries to push anti-Protestant, anti-Calvinist ideas. And he's pushing for this whole beginning of Jesuits coming in and inquisitions and all this. And this is what upsets the Calvinists, right? Because they feel they're losing their position, losing their power. And so, and a threat to their existence. So they go in, they get all the Catholic priests in Prague. They're up in this tower and they throw them out the window. That's the defenestration. They throw them out the window, right? And none of them die because there's a cart full of poop at the bottom and they land in the poop and they live. But this is how it starts. So you ate the sausage because it starts, the first wave starts in Bohemia. Okay. It started there. Okay. Because of this defenestration. The next phase, though, after defeating the Bohemians, right? There's a whole war, huge conflict. So it's like multiple levels. So this is the first phase. Well, then the Holy Roman Emperor, feeling emboldened, then decides he's going to issue an edict that removes all the land that was given to countries like Denmark that are Protestant. That land's going to go back to the Catholic Church. So now if you look at your thing, you got some type of pastry. It's Danish. You eat that, it's because it's a Danish phase. The first phase was sausage. That's Bohemia. That's where it starts, defenestration of Prague. Second phase is in Denmark. Okay. And so that's the Danes. And then they get thoroughly kicked by the Holy Roman Emperor. He's just mopping the floor with everybody until when it looks like they're going to lose, because remember, they're going to have their land taken away and they fight back. The Swedes, who are Lutherans, jump in. So it starts with Calvinists in Bohemia, then brought in Danes And now Swedes, who are Lutheran, because they're fearing to lose their land, and the Swedes under Gustav Adolphus now joins in because Sweden wants to get a foothold in Europe or on the land, right? Because they're up north. They want to get across the Baltic and get a foothold in England itself. So that's why if you look at your bag, you got Swedish fish. So you had sausage in Bohemia, where this started with the Calvinists, who are fearing they're going to lose their position and be outlawed, right? Because the Peace of Augsburg doesn't cover them. And then the next phase was the Danes, who are afraid their land's going to be taken from them because they're Protestant, and the Holy Roman Emperor's mopping the floor with them all. And then the Swedes come in to protect the other Protestants, and at the same time get a foothold. They want to get onto the country, right? They want to get onto the continent. Here's the rub. You ready? Is that the Swedes don't have enough money to fight this war. So the people that are paying for it are the French. Now, wait a minute. Aren't the French Catholic? Why are the French paying the Swedes to fight a war against another Catholic, being the Holy Roman Empire? Well, the reason is because Richelieu, who's now the advisor and protector of Louis the 13th, wants to weaken the Germans because he sees them as a threat, both economically and politically. And if they're fighting and broken, in the end, it's going to benefit France. Well, the Swedes fight up to the point where King Gustav Adolphus ends up dying. So you notice what happened. We start out religious, protect our rights, Calvinists in Bohemia, throw Catholics out windows. Then you protect our religion, the Danes, who are like, we can't lose our land. We fought for this. It's a religious thing, still a religious. But then all of a sudden the Swedes show up and it's turned from a little bit religious. It's a little bit religious and it's a little bit political because we got to get our feet on the ground. And then it's full on in the last phase, the fourth stage of this war. So we had Danes, we had Bohemians, we had Danes, we had Swedes. And then when King Gustav Adolphus dies, this all falls apart and they're going to sue for peace because they've been fighting this now for 20 some years. Well, then all of a sudden the French go, oh, heck no, we paid you to fight. And so the French invade, right? The French invade to mop the place all up, and they don't care. They're just killing everybody. They're killing everybody because they're the French, and they're like fight, hobo, fight, and they're gonna mop this up. And that's why you got cheese, because it's French, but cheese, all right? So you ate sausage where it started in Bohemia. You ate Danish for the Danes. You ate Swedish fish for the Swedes. And then you got the French and then now it's clearly political. It started at the beginning with the sausage as religious, and then slowly over your meal, it turned to a political one. See how that worked? Now, the social impact of this, obviously, it was a religious feud that now is clearly a political one. It's also, this is the first war where you see large amounts of guns being used. All right, that you're going to see the wheel lock and the matchlock are used in large numbers. And they're going to wipe out entire 30-40% of the population. Entire towns are just decimated. There's more wolves in towns than there are people. And wolves aren't really social kind of animals. They're more like eat your face off thing. Okay, eat people. The starvation in Germany gets so bad that they're talking about people digging up graves and eating the bodies. Yuck, all right. But the point of this, how it ends, is the Treaty of Westphalia. And so the Treaty of Westphalia basically kind of ends this whole conflict in 1848, but it does some things in the process. Is that one, each of these German princes now could pick their religion. So basically, and they're free from the whole Roman Emperor's control for the most part. It basically extends the Peace of Augsburg, which it just basically this did exactly what the French wanted. They wanted France to be crippled, or not France, sorry. What the French wanted was Germany to be crippled and not be able to unify, and they did that. They made it a non-unified country. All right? They're going to the northern part, the Dutch Netherlands, then becomes independent. That's a black eye to Spain. You're going to see Alsace. Now, this is the fun part. is that Alsace-Lorraine is this weird little section between Germany and France, and it goes back and forth. Like one time it's this, and next time it's this. And so every time we turn around in history, one side's taking it. So here they carved out a German province and moved it to France. And then after the Napoleonic War, the French Revolution, they're going to move it this way. And then Napoleon goes the other way, and it goes back and forth. These poor people don't know what they are. Sweden gets their foothold. They get control of they get lands in northern Germany, and they get control of parts of the Baltic. Switzerland becomes an independent state, and everybody can put their money in a Swiss bank now. Sweden also got a voice in the Holy Roman Empire, which thoroughly, again, divides Germany and not allowing it to get unified. And then Brandenburg, which you're going to need to know where Brandenburg is later, got larger territories. And Brandenburg later has become a place called Prussia. And Prussia is what's going to unify Germany. So here's division of Germany. Here's unification of Germany. Okay. Religious provision, basically, it just extends, they write in Calvin into the Peace of Augsburg. So Calvinism is legal, and then each state can basically pick their leader. So it further divides the place too. So Spain is just yeah, they just got wiped out in this. Okay. And then you're seeing an increase of Swedish power. Poland, and that we'll talk about later. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the witchcraft trials later, too, as part of this. Okay? And that's what it looked like under Philip II. So, folks, there you go. Sorry we went 10 minutes more than we normally do, but hopefully you enjoyed the treat, and this makes all sense, and we'll talk more about this in class. All right? All right. We'll talk to you later.